Courage to be Disliked is a great book I enjoyed. And some of that aspect of that book talks about the courage to be average. And what I mean by that in social media, everyone gets caught up in the cult of mourn and the disease of comparison. And when you do so, you're more likely to put an inauthentic self out there because you're not being real, you're not being genuine. For my own example, I'm in a realm very similar to yours where you can use skills, tools, and techniques to develop trust and healthy, strong relationships for the dark art of manipulation. Or taking advantage of someone, for, as I call it, the hooky spooky spy tricks or the carnival tricks, where I can get you to give me information, elicit your banking information. And I don't do that. But if I used it as great clickbait, I'm going to get a hell of a lot more likes and get a hell of a lot more shares. I mean, I just do it when I do my short reels. It's so fascinating seeing the hashtags I use or the content I'm using to see what people resonate with. Then when I put out, like, a great example, I just put out a short a couple days ago of just a genuine smile, how to make a difference in someone's life. That got the least amount of likes out of anything I've put out recently. Why? Because it's about being kind. It's about being nice. It's about how to form a good relationship with someone basically just by smiling. But it's not clickbait. Here's the great aspect of this, is that when you're genuine, sincere, and you're putting out who you generally are and what you stand for, what do you attract? Likes attract.
Yes.
I'd much rather attract that kind of individual in my life, just like we connected through the same way. You and I are a great example of connecting through the virtual world first. We became close friends before we even met in person once. And why? You're genuine, sincere with who you are, and so am I. And so those likes attract. I'd rather have 5 great, healthy, strong relationships based on that and only 5 likes than 10,000 likes with a bunch of creeps trying to reach out to me just so I can teach them how to manipulate the hell out of people.
Let me ask you, what if everything you've been taught about building trust in life and in leadership is actually wrong? If so, what might that have been costing you? Well, that's where we're about to go and what you're about to discover. Welcome to the Dov Baron Show. Come for the stories, stay for the learning. I'm your host, Dov Baron. I advise high-performing leaders and organizations in how to harness their emotional source code to purposefully transform their tribe. Today on the Dov Baron Show, our guest is Robin Dreeke. He is the former chief of the FBI's Counterintelligence Behavioral Analysts Program, where his job was to recruit spies and build trust in life or death situations. You ready for that? Today, he teaches leaders like you how to build what he calls unbreakable alliances, relationships that not only survive in conflict, but thrive in it. More on that in a moment. You're tuned into the Dov Baron Show. This is an exploration into the minds that shape the world. Every episode is a raw, unscripted collaboration between my guests and me as we dive into the truths that few dare to ask. We find guests for you who are often unknown to the general public, but absolute titans in their field. The kinds of people that high-profile leaders turn to when they need that edge. If you're the kind of leader who craves depth over sound bites, hit that subscribe button right now, because this is where real thinkers come to sharpen their edge. For the next 2 episodes, we're going to get very real. You will see that you don't build high-performance teams with trust falls or birthday shout-outs. You may not know this, but high-performing teams are built in the same way that spies are recruited, through psychological perception, earned safety, and ruthless honesty. Welcome to part 1 of this 2-part episode of the Dov Baron Show, where we're going to be joined by Robin Dreeke. Robin's not here to talk about nice-to-have communication tips. He's here to teach you and I how to build alliances that don't break under pressure. And if you don't know how to do that, well, you're actually gambling with your influence. So you got to turn up the volume and help me to welcome the author of several books, including It's Not All About Me, the top 10 techniques for building quick rapport with anyone. He's also the author of The Trust Code and Sizing People Up, a veteran FBI agent's user manual for behavioral prediction. And his latest book is called Unbreakable Alliances. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you servant leader, spectacular human, and my mate, Robin Dreeke. Welcome, sir.
Thanks, Dov. And the most important part there is my mate. Yeah, friendship, alliances, and just healthy, strong relationships in life are really the key to overcoming and moving through any challenge we face.
It's really interesting because when I first saw the book, I thought we're in a very interesting time where alliances are being betrayed, whether that's internationally, but also subjectively. People can't sit down for frickin' Thanksgiving with their family. The alliance of family is even broken because of what color hat people wear. And so it's really interesting as a title. I don't know if you had that in mind when you wrote the title, but it's something that's come to bear very subjectively, very personally, because we're talking about politics in a way we didn't at dinner tables. And it's come very much clear because I live in the, quote, 51st state. I live in Canada, which was the US's greatest alliance. And many feel like that alliance has been broken. And it's not just here. So it's really interesting. Did you think about that when you were writing the book, that title, or was it way before that?
It's a great question. Yes-ish, I'll say. So the book and the content is an evolution, like we all are, of where I was at when I was writing it. And you just name the other books. It comes with rapport, then trust, and sizing people up. And then when you put it all together, it really is about alliances and relationships. And so Unbreakable was really the key word that was eluding me for a while. You're right, though. From the time we're in, I was like, what we all are seeking and craving and need most of all is really an unbreakable alliance, someone in our life that we feel no matter what, they have us, we have them, and we're together, regardless of, and I do my little micro gesture expression here, regardless of these little data points that we might be incongruent on. We always have been. There's always been things we disagree with other people on. And if you give yourself that negative confirmation bias, like all you're going to do is look for what you differ on, you'll always find it. Stop that crap. Just let's focus, find someone's greatness, find what you have in common, and let's build from there towards the most important thing that we all need. It's a good, healthy relationship. Without that, it all falls apart. And so if you start with the granular, you keep it simple, you keep it focused on what you do have in common, give it a moment, give it a breath. It'll pass as well, and the world will continue, and so will our existence.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. I think it's more important for us to focus on what we have in common than what we have in difference, as I've said before many times in these shows. Many of my friends are Republicans. Many of my friends are Democrats. Some of my friends are Trumpians, and some of them are not. I also have a lot in common with every single one of them because they're all sane human beings. Because you can have opinions that are different than mine based on your own sanity, based on your own reasoning. And it's like, okay, fine, because I'm going to learn something from you from that point of view, as opposed to you're wrong or I'm wrong, which is just craziness.
Yeah, 100%. That word wrong is always a fascinating word to me too. Wrong is another way of saying, well, your context of what is different than mine. And as long as no one's trying to kill anyone, let's just try to understand each other's context.
That brings up a really interesting point, because in Unbreakable Alliances, you emphasize the importance of building trust through authenticity and vulnerability. And you and I have had conversations about that before. Robin is a returning champion. He's been on the show before when we talked about trust in the past. In today's digital age, where most of our interactions are mediated through some kind of screen or, worst of all, social media, how do you adapt the principles to forge this genuine connection in a virtual environment? And can you share with us an experience where you've successfully built an, quote, unbreakable alliance without having that traditional face-to-face interaction that you and I love so much?
You saw me doing the nonverbal of stress relief, just doing that exhale, because that is a really tough challenge that people do. I mean, think about that. Authenticity, being genuine, being present, and forging a healthy reliance through social media, when a vast majority of people are putting a persona out there that is the 3-second highlight reel of who they are. When you do that, just think about this. You're not going to be forging a real relationship. People are forging a relationship with a 3-second facade of who you are. I do this backpacking thing, as you know, I think, where I'm out on the trail for days and sometimes weeks on end. And I'll take a photo and I'll put that photo on Instagram. I'll put it on social media and I'm smiling. And people have said on social media, oh, you look like you're in your element. You're so peaceful. It must be so beautiful and tranquil. I said, dude, you saw the 2-second highlight reel of 24 hours of suck.
Exactly.
So, yeah, the greatest challenge is that The Courage to Be Disliked is a great book I enjoyed. And some of that aspect of that book talks about the courage to be average. And what I mean by that in social media, everyone gets caught up in the cult of mourn and the disease of comparison. And when you do so, you're more likely to put an inauthentic self out there because you're not being real, you're not being genuine. For my own example, I'm in a realm very similar to yours where you can use skills, tools, and techniques to develop trust and healthy, strong relationships for the dark art of manipulation or taking advantage of someone, for, as I call it, the hooky spooky spy tricks or the carnival tricks where I can get you to give me information, elicit your banking information. And I don't do that. But if I use it as great clickbait, I'm going to get a hell of a lot more likes. I'm going to get a hell of a lot more shares. I mean, I just do it when I do my short reels. It's so fascinating seeing the hashtags I use or the content I'm using to see what people resonate with. Then when I put out, like, a great example, I just put out a short a couple days ago of just a genuine smile, how to make a difference in someone's life. That got the least amount of likes out of anything I've put out recently. Why? Because it's about being kind. It's about being nice. It's about how to form a good relationship with someone basically just by smiling. But it's not clickbait. Here's the great aspect of this, is that when you're genuine, sincere, and you're putting out who you generally are and what you stand for, what do you attract? Likes attract.
Yes.
I'd much rather attract that kind of individual in my life, just like we connected through the same way. You and I are a great example of connecting through the virtual world first. We became close friends before we even met in person once. And why? You're genuine, sincere with who you are, and so am I. And so those likes attract. I'd rather have 5 great, healthy, strong relationships based on that and only 5 likes than 10,000 likes with a bunch of creeps trying to reach out to me just so I can teach them how to manipulate the hell out of people.
But that's the challenge, isn't it, Robin? Because then we become divided into 2 sections of our lives, which is at a business level, we have to have likes and we have to have followers. And at a personal level, I want deep, abiding, like you said, unbreakable alliance friendships that I can really, really trust. And at the same time, if I want to survive in business, and I'm not talking about me, but anybody, I need 20,000 clicks on this, and I need people to go through that, and I need people to follow the funnel or whatever it might be. That's the freaking challenge compared to pre-social media days when you and I would say, we have to build trust. All relationships are based on trust, and trust is what people buy, right? Well, is it? Well, I could trust you for teaching me how to smile, or I can trust you for teaching me how to manipulate Charlie Brown over there. Oh, well, I'm going to click on the how to manipulate Charlie Brown. And that's so much of the world we live in. You and I have many friends in common, and I see the people who are doing well that we both know, and it's all that clickbait stuff. I mean, the people I'm thinking of do a spectacular job of it. Like, it's magnificent. I really look at it and go, I should be more like that. I do. My brain goes like that. I should be more like that. And I'm like, yeah, but that's not who I am. I can't do that. But it is phenomenal for getting that following. But the following is not the trust. And I think that that's the key point that you put forward in this book and in life, is a big following is not an alliance. And I think we really get seduced into thinking they're the same thing.
Yeah, 100%, Dov. You and I play the long game of life. Just like we were talking about before we came on, the most important thing that we carry with us is who we are as a human being, and most importantly, as a parent, as a grandparent, or a guardian, or a close, good friend, we call the loving critic in someone's life.
Yep.
I'll go to Robin Sharma's great book, Who Will Cry When You Die?
Yes.
When you think about it, I loved his analogy. I use it all the time. If you're sitting here and do your own thought experiment, as Einstein says, who could walk around that corner right now and you just get your goosebumps and you light up and say, Dov, man, I got to cut this short because the best person in the entire world just walked around that corner and you can't wait to talk to them. And ask yourself, what specifically are they doing that inspires you to feel that way? And then ask yourself, are you that person for someone else? And if you can't answer it, then what are you going to do to be that person? I cover a lot of these true crime cases, and there's one I'm covering right now in particular. Someone is being accused of basically hitting and running and killing someone.
Wow.
And here's the saddest part, and it's like 50-50 guilty or innocent, and there's a lot of play back and forth. But the thing that really struck me about that is no one is standing up and saying they couldn't have done that. Can you imagine living your life after whatever the verdict is, even if you're found innocent, with the vast majority of people thinking you're the type of person that could have hit and killed someone and ran away?
Yeah, and again, you and I have talked a lot about this in previous conversations, both on air and off air. We live in a binary world where things are black, white, right, wrong, yes, no. And that's not humanity.
No.
It's not humanity at all. And so somebody does a hit and run and we go, what a bastard. What a horrible human being, drove away and left somebody die. Yeah, that is the basic black, white. But hold on, what was going on in that person's life at that moment? What was the neurochemical reaction of that human being as they did that? Were they shifted into a place they'd never been before, of deep panic and freaking out, and got down the road and went, oh shit, what have I done? And want to go back, but don't know how to go back. That's another context that you never considered. Or, oh my God, this will end my life and I will destroy the life of my child that I'm just brought into the world. I'm making up scenarios, of course, but these are all a million different ways to look at a thing. And for me, when we talk about communication, you and I have had lots of conversations about this. This is where we've fallen down since social media. Context and nuance have gone out of the freaking window. And that's horrible, because everything that's said has a nuance and a context to it, that if you take a snippet of what I'm saying today out of this conversation and play it in a different context, what does it mean? I don't know. But you can put a spin on it, and that's a lot of time what we're seeing in the mainstream media and even in social media about a particular conversation. I'll give you a simple example that I know you'll be familiar with because everybody's familiar with it. And that is that Bill Maher went to the White House and met with Donald Trump. Bill Maher, who is a more traditional Democrat, but certainly criticizes the left as well as the right. And a lot of the people on the left criticized him for going to do that. And he said, I think we should go talk to the enemy. I'm with him on that. But when he came back, he got heavy criticism. Now, the problem with the criticism is context. And the problem with the going there is context. Because Bill Maher came back and said, this is not the man who you see on TV who's screaming and shouting like a loony. And I found him to be very affable. And I'm like, yeah, I agree with you. You should go down and talk to the enemy. But the lack of context is in the people who are listening to you who are either pure left or pure right. And then there's a lack of context of Bill Maher going, because you don't have the psychological understanding to realize, my judgment here, I'll put my hand up, that you're dealing with a charismatic narcissist who will be whatever you need them to be because they want you to go away and say, what a great guy. That's what it's going to do. So if you miss that part, if you miss that context, then you go, he's a great guy. And you're telling the truth in the context of what you understand. That's the problem with this, is that we lack this nuance, we lack this context. And I understand that some of that is a lot of set of skills and tools that you and I, you especially, far more familiar with than most of the general public. But that's what's bloody missing, and it's infuriating.
It's an interesting response. I think that if people could start building this in, it would help those moments. So as you're describing this, again, for everyone listening and watching, do a thought experiment on this. As Dov was talking about Bill Maher going to the White House and talking to Donald Trump, what was your reaction? Were you thinking and contemplating he was stupid, he's being gullible? Were you thinking all that? Or were you like, oh, that's interesting. I want to know what happened. Like every time you were saying something, I got really, really more curious. It's like, oh, let's hear more about that. So I see life as a great show. I just like sitting back, and the greatest thing about, I think, calling myself a behaviorist is I don't take sides. I just sit back and watch the show. I try to get as much context as possible. Sometimes people ask me, how can I remain so calm and positive all the time? I mean, you've known me a long time. I am nothing but positive all the time because I take in historical context, of things. That's why when you said the 51st state, I said, yeah, that'll be the word in the thing today. But, wait 100 years, I don't remember it. I see what I mean? Just like, it'll blow away in the wind. Because having that kind of context and taking that step back when we need to and getting curious gives us the ability to just stay cognitive, stay present, stay objective, and keep the lower brain from engaging in emotional hijacking when we lose our cognitive, thoughtful process, and we then destroy any potential relationships we have along the way.
Let's just take that for a minute. You and I always end up in weird and wonderful alleyways, and isn't that great? So in that context, I realize you were at the FBI. You were there for a long time. I'm sure you had your criticisms of it while you were in there about where it was failing and where it was great and et cetera, et cetera. But you were a top bloke in there. Did you see that, particularly afterwards, when you left, because it's always better when you're outside of the forest. You've been in the forest, you spent some time in the forest, but then you stand back, so now you have both views. When you came out of it, did you look at it as something that really needed a good, hard shakeup?
Yeah, I needed it when I was still in it too. But I won't be exclusive to the FBI. Now we're getting the road of, and I don't want, it's not a political road, it's a government and how government functions role. Anytime you have people that are appointed by an administration to run an organization that's supposed to be independent, it can never inherently be independent because it's appointed by someone who's not.
Exactly.
And so that always filters down.
Right.
Always. I served in the FBI from 97 to 2018. My directors were Louis Freeh, Mueller, Comey, and Wray. And each one of them had their own minions under them. Each one of them was subservient to the person that appointed them to a degree. Some would say they're more independent or less independent. Then anytime you did something operationally, you had to go to other departments to get authorization, whether it's Department of Justice and the Attorney General, who's also an appointee. I had to go to State Department all the time to do anything operational when it came to national security stuff. And State Department heads was also a political appointee. And everyone under that political appointee is not just thinking about that job, but they're thinking about the next job. And so, it's funny. I was just talking about this on another show I was just doing. You would think that being my job inside the FBI before I retired was I was chief of the behavioral analysis program, and I strategized recruiting spies in layman's terms. But 90% of my time wasn't actually strategizing the spy recruitment, it's strategizing how the case agent can communicate with management and all these other people to inspire them to feel safe to say yes to the righteous operation that's going to protect the national security of the United States and our NATO allies.
You're doing office politics at the highest possible level.
That's all you're doing. I mean, literally, it's all you're doing is strategizing office politics, both inside your own organization, all the other three-letter organizations, foreign organizations. I worked with MI5 and MI6 and CSIS in Canada, Australians nonstop and all the time. I had to understand their political idealizations. I had to understand, because it comes down to the simple core concept of everyone just wants to feel safe.
Of course.
And I always had to ask myself, what can I do to inspire them to feel safe with the choice to align with me from their context, from their point of view? So in order to do that, I had to understand their challenges, their priorities, their pain points, their friction points. And I couldn't judge those things because if I judged it, I'd have a wall go up in me and I'd have negative confirmation bias and I'd start fighting, which doesn't get me to yes with what I wanted to do. So yeah, this was a fascinating dynamic to do for over 22 years. You get a few reps and just stop judging. And I know you say you can't stop judging, as I remember when you said that very well, but you do the best you can,
of course,
to mitigate your own biases and confirmation biases and your own judgment so you can communicate in an effective manner to do the things that matter most.
Well, one of the things you talk about in the new book is building relationships that not only survive conflict, but thrive in it. And I think that this is, again, part of the challenge we have in society. I feel like everybody's fighting with everybody and everybody's terrified of conflict, as opposed to having healthy conflict, which is something very different. So everybody's terrified of having conflict because the conflict they see that's demonstrated to them is pretty unhealthy and dysfunctional. So what you've just described is a depth of understanding of how to have conflict. What is it that you, in the context of your book, Unbreakable Alliances, what is it that you can teach us about having that level of conflict that when things are tough, we don't just survive that struggle, that we actually thrive from it?
I try to keep things really simple, even though I use way too many narrative words. I apologize. Every time you face a challenge, even the word conflict gives a judgment to it to me. Life is challenges, but yeah, it's conflict.
Yeah.
Every time you face this, and I do this all the time with both my kids, the first question I ask is a what question, not a why. Why is very subjective and it gets people's defenses up and triggers insecurities and all those things. I ask a very specific what question. What is the specific outcome we're looking for?
Mm-hmm.
So it keeps people's cognitive brain engaged, keep the emotionals out there, keep the emotional hijacking crazy brain from entering the best you can.
Yes.
And then after you answer that what question, then next comes the who question. Who do we need to talk to? What relationships do we need to build to work this challenge and be innovative moving through it? And so that to some people, if you get emotional, becomes conflict. If you stay cognitive and pragmatic, I just think it's moving through challenges, which can look like conflict. They're not easy sometimes, or a lot of times ever. It's working through it by asking what questions. I was literally in a meeting today where I'm at a board meeting and a board member was saying, well, we're not moving fast enough. We need to be doing X, Y, and Z. And I said, what outcome that we're not doing now that you think we should be doing there? Well, we're not moving fast enough because we've been stagnant. I said, what specific outcome are you seeking that we aren't doing right now? And then he said, well, we need to do X, Y, and Z. I said, oh, so what you're saying is we need to do this, this, and this. So instead of saying subjectively and getting people emotional hijacking it by saying you were not doing enough and you suck, here's the outcomes you say specifically we need to be doing. What can you do to make that happen? So again, it's like getting people off the emotional hijacking and not judging. Yeah, kind of judging, but poking at other people saying you're not doing enough. I'm better than you and all that. Yeah, shut up. What are you looking to accomplish? What can we do to do that? What relationships do we need? And so again, what, who?
Right. And that's the interesting thing, isn't it? You know, that I often will say my religion is curiosity. And like anybody with a religion, I fail at it miserably all the time, and I've got to keep bringing myself back to it. But I think that is where we get so stuck, is we're not curious enough. I fail at it all the time. I fail at it in my marriage. I fail at it with my children. I fail at it with my friends. I fail at it in my business. But because it's my faith, I have to keep coming back and going, what am I not questioning? What am I not understanding? What is it that I've got to dig deeper in on this? Where have I jumped to a conclusion? Where have I said something, thought it meant this, and then not really asked how did it land? That's so difficult.
It is. And I think the most important thing, the things that pop in your head when someone else is speaking, first of all, forever listen to, make sure you give yourself enough grace. Because if you're aware enough to say the things that Dov just said about himself, which I would never in a million years think about him, because we are also harsh on ourselves much more than we are to others. And so if you're self-aware enough to know that you don't know it all, it means you're on the journey of mastery. Mastery is not a destination. It's falling in love with the process every day. You are in love with the process of being curious, and you beat yourself up for not being curious enough every day. But I guarantee you, it's 100% more than 99% of the people out there. So give yourself some grace and just dig in every day and fall in love with that process of just being curious. And when something sparks an imagination or something, like when you're speaking, I got curious. What made Dov say that? What's going on in Dov's life today? When he's talking about Bill Maher at the White House. Boy, that's an interesting thing that happened. I'd love to know X, Y, and Z. Instead of saying, what's he doing? Blah, 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 blah. No, it's like, boy, what's causing that to happen? What was the outcome of that? And even when you're saying that Trump is X, Y, and Z, it's like, wow, let's look at some data on that as well. Just examine everything, do a deep dive, because the world is so full of, like you're saying at the very beginning, so full of, we call it fake news. That's kind of a cliche thing. So full of inaccurate data points and snippets of highlight moments. You got to do a deep dive on absolutely everything. I was sharing with you before we started, I have a publicist for the book. During one of our conversations, one of my favorite questions to ask someone is, hey, so what are you reading right now? And she told me she's reading or wants to read Demon Copperhead. It's a Pulitzer Prize winning fiction book. It's not my genre.
Right.
But I'm almost done with it now.
Right.
Because why? I want to understand the person in my life at a deeper level. So I'm reading and consuming the same information she's consuming, not because I think it's right or wrong, because I seek to understand, because I became curious about her, about what matters to her in her life. Every time someone says something that kind of strikes me a little different than what my current understanding is, I get excited to learn and dive into that. Curiosity. I only discovered it myself a couple of years ago too. Growing up, I was just survival mode.
You just said something profoundly important. I think that so often when I meet people and I want to go, please be more curious. But what I also understand is it's pretty much impossible to be genuinely curious when you're in survival mode.
100%.
And part of the world we're living in today, which is put us into cognitive overload. There's a new executive order every 20 minutes, and there's a new political this or new outrage that every 20 minutes. That cognitive overload puts, as you understand better than most, takes us out of our prefrontal cortex, puts us back into the amygdala, puts us back into the fear part of our brain. And as a result, we can't be curious because we're life, death. Oh my God, how am I going to survive? And again, all is what you talked about earlier. All that's clickbait that stops you from thinking and being willing, able to be curious about the person in front of you. Because the person in front of you is nothing more than a list of your assumptions about them until you get curious. And then you go, oh, I would have thought people at the FBI are XYZ. I would have thought people who are doing this are ABC. Well, no. What do you know? What do you know? Isn't it fascinating? One of the Dalai Lama's greatest friends is somebody I know very well who is an atheist. And the Dalai Lama spreads wonderful messages about this person. Dr. James is a wonderful human being, but he's an atheist. But you assume because he's friends with the Dalai Lama, he must be a Buddhist. No, that's an assumption. And then you go, oh, wow. Right? You also assume that because J.D. Vance went to the inauguration of the new Pope, that he was going to kill him because he hung out with the last Pope and he died directly after. J.D. Vance is the Pope killer. It's silliness.
Here's a great thing to do. He lists a lot of emotion because he's vice president under Trump. He wrote Hillbilly Elegy long before he even was in politics.
Yes.
It is a fantastic read. So it's a great source book because it talks about him and his life arc from growing up, free of filter.
Yes.
Because there was no agenda to it other than here's the life story of someone who can succeed and overcome this background. So if you can let go, that's why every time someone's doing something that's a political figure, the first thing I do is I go for source books.
Right.
Another one, I think Vance is her name, who wrote Elon Musk's first biography back in 2015.
Yep.
Another great read. That was written just as he had formed SpaceX and how it almost failed.
Mm-hmm.
Long before anything else. And I love who just did his recent biography. He did Leonardo da Vinci's. Anyway, he was Tulane professor. Anyway, he did Musk's recent biography. It's different because it was written during a time when he got involved in politics. And so there's a little less of a source code in there. So it's just fascinating. So just read.
Yeah, you just brought it back to the same thing, which is context.
Yes.
I wrote a piece on Elon Musk and I talked about the context, that here's the guy who was the darling of the left because he brought electric cars and put it up, made them popular, and then suddenly becomes the darling of the right. If you look at the emotional source code of that, I wrote a whole article on that. If you look at the emotional source code of that, you can see the same thing is running through, but you're looking at it through a particular context. And if you see it in that context, then of course, Elon Musk is a crazy person or Elon Musk is a genius. Well, where's your context? That's always the point.
And here's a great example, to your point on that one. He hasn't changed. He's exactly the same through his entire arc, has not shifted at all.
No.
But again, that context from when you take a snippet of trying to understand someone, it's going to give you a different outcome from how you perceive. That's why go back as early as you can and get that arc as much as you can.
Exactly.
And right, wrong, and different. There's no one perfect in this world. It's a hoot. It's a real hoot.
Well, we're already at the end of part one, Robin. I want to make sure people can find out about you and all your resources, and I know you have a lot. Before we jump back into part two of the show, please tell people where they can find out more about you and all of your resources, especially your new book.
Yeah, really simple and easy, all in one place, robindreeke.com, ROBINDREEKE.com. And you'll get links to my books. They're all on Amazon and other places, anywhere you can buy your books. My YouTube channel is also really good. I got a lot of my behavioral stuff on there. But you name it, it's on there, including my 77 episodes of my own Forged by Trust podcast, my great interview of Dov, where he said, the killer is you.
We'll be back in just one click for more of our delicious conversation with the irrepressible Robin Dreeke. We'll be back in just one click. Stay curious, my friends. Stay curious.